how do you think countries like Israel or Jordan or some of these other countries are they going to change how their philosophy on their government and their foreign policy will it change or will it stay the same after the regime falls? I mean, I personally think, you know, if I was someone that lived in the region, I think that Israel, you know, could be a little bit more relaxed so much, you know what I mean, where they can focus on other things, not having to worry about this nation or whatever trying to destroy them off the planet anymore. I think they can go back to being a little bit more relaxed. But then again, someone brought up Patrick McDavid's show. On that show, they talked about even after the regime falls, there's still going to be, as they said, rats in the walls that have to be exterminated. Do you think things will change or will it stay the same? Like, will their stance on how, they operate will stay the same essentially?
Okay, so those are two different questions, right? Like right, like that's for Israel. Like, do you want to focus on Israel, like how that's going to affect Israel? Because
Sure.
I mean,
Sure, definitely.
I could talk about hours about how this is going to affect Israel, but let me do the short version of it. I mean, almost every anti-Israeli group, any sophisticated anti-Israeli terroristic group, is funded and trained and equipped by the Islamic Republic. So I'm not suggesting that with the fall of the Islamic Republic there is going to be zero threats to Israel, but you could imagine how much less is going to be. Like, honestly, I don't know if Israelis have eh, you know imagine that in their mind. We're talking about a world that that there is very little threats against Israel, like compared to
Mhm,
what we have right now. Like, Hamas would not be able to do anything that it does without the support. I mean, not that they would lose all their funders, right? But Hamas would
mhm,
not be Hamas without the Islamic Republic. Hezbollah wouldn't even exist without the Islamic Republic. Hashd al-Shabi wouldn't exist without the Islamic Republic, right?
mhm,
Kataib Kataib Hezbollah, the Kataib groups, all of those groups, none of them would be able to exist without the Islamic Republic. So imagine everything, every single threat that comes at the Israel either not existing or being a fraction of the power that they had before. I think the fall of the Islamic Republic is basically the end of the axis of resistance. It will just be small little terrorist groups here and there, but not anything so globally connected and the network that they have right now. It would be the end of it. But not only that, I think but wait, there's more. I think on top of that, we will have the new government in Iran also be fighting the same people who Israel is fighting. You know how we talk about Israel having the same enemies as the United States, and that's why they're so mutually aligned when it comes to military activities, right?
mhm,
I think that's going to be the same thing with Iran. So imagine all of that oil and gas that has been spent on building up Hamas and Hezbollah is now going to the same oil and gas is now not only it's going to be cut, not only is going to be cut and not be funding Hamas and Hezbollah, now it's going to be spent on fighting terrorist groups in the region, which are the same enemies of Israel. And I could anticipate, like I could basically, I think that there's going to be a lot of given that they have the same enemies. I think there's going to be a lot of joint military drills between like IDF and the Artesh. So Israel's, I think there's going to be operations like practice operations that the Israel's military and Iran's military are going to have with each other. There's going to be a lot of intelligence sharing between Mossad and Savak. So you're going to get a lot of people are just make the mistake about thinking about the removal of all of that funding towards these terrorist groups, but not that many people think about the addition of all of that funding towards the military, all of that oil and gas going towards the military that would be fighting Israel's enemies as well. So I think the consequences of that is really hard to exaggerate the consequences of that. We're talking about a much more stable Middle East compared to what we have right now. Like much more stable. And not only that, that stability is just going to attract, money loves stability, right? Wherever you have stability, capital will just, it's like osmosis. Whenever you have stability somewhere, it just sucks in money into that area whenever you create stability. So this stability is going to bring a lot of economic opportunity in the region, and that money itself. So there's a triple effect: the stopping of the funds to the terrorist groups, the addition of funds towards the military that will be fighting these terrorist groups, and the third, the de-radicalization of young people because of the addition of economic activity. The stability brings economic activity. Economic activity brings de-radicalization. So a lot of these young boys who become terrorists is because they don't get laid, because they can't get a girlfriend, because they can't get a job to start a family. Okay, they don't have these things. Once you bring economic activity, you bring hope for the future. You have something to live for. You basically suffocate these radical groups, not just from money, not just from weapons, but also from the young boys who would be joining these terrorist groups, because now they actually have a store to go run. Right now that they have a store to go run, to go, there's so many customers to sell to. So there's something that occupies their mind, which is, it gives them hope to build their life for the future. So it's not just about money and weapons, it's also about the young boys who are now going to be busy doing something else rather than not having any hope for the future, and therefore being radicalized to join these terrorist groups.
Okay, we are going to move on the list. We've got a couple more. We want to hurry and make sure we get to everyone. Next, we have Paul.
Hello? Can you all hear me? Okay. If you thing I want to remind you, if you take a look at the old Silk Road and the One Belt Road Initiative, they follow the same map. And I think what you all are agreeing on is the infrastructure in which this will bring the Middle East out of where it's been. And I believe it also will
Yeah,
also
I'm not
bring about.
understanding. I'm not
Okay,
understanding
just
what
get
you're
me
saying,
then.
because you're
Just get.
sorry, Paul. Yeah, if you want, what you could do is you could write your question in the chat, and then maybe BT, would that be okay? Would you be able to read it?
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and move on to Richard. And then, Paul, if you want to put that in the chat, we'll get to it. Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
Thanks a lot. I had a question. It was actually directed more to Jeffrey, but anyone feel free to jump in. So, given that the IRGC basically is adopting the same tactics that Hamas used in the last war, basically the embedding with civilians, looking to maximize civilian casualties for adverse media pressure, the strategy is basically win by not getting obliterated, right? We deployed several of our assets away from the Pacific, normally basically Taiwan guards and other areas of the world, to focus on the Iran Armada. The concern, I just wonder if you could just jump in and see, is if the IRGC can somehow draw this into an extensive conflict, would that make a Taiwan invasion more likely? Is that something that you anticipate could be an issue? Just wanted to get your thoughts.
So, yeah, I mean, there was a previous question as to why we didn't put some warheads on foreheads in the initial, like a couple of weeks ago. And that's because there exists a minimum entrance barrier of targets that would need to be serviced for you to be able to sit there and engage in air a subsequent air campaign. I mean, strategic radar, integrated air and missile defense, C4SR, all this other stuff. The Mullah regime has indeed placed a lot of the headquarters she was talking about. This also applies to your question within non-combatant rich environments that's sometimes called the urban shield strategy. The IRGC and the besieged has moved weapons out of those areas and placed them in other civilian things like hospitals and schools. They actually have co-opted hospitals and schools and turned them into HQs. The other part, this goes to the point you're regarding how, like, members of the autocratic bloc, whether it's Putin's criminalized counterintelligence state, Chinese Communist Party, Mullah regime, North Korean regime, etc., are coordinating their efforts to try and leverage the finite nature of critical munitions like long range strike munitions. So, if we put if we hit the Mullah regime, well, we don't have as many long range strike munitions and interceptors and the rest of it to deal with Chinese Communist Party's, attempt at invading Taiwan, Putin's criminalized counterintelligence state punching or attacking elements of Europe. That's true. They're doing that. So one of the things we looked at to kind of like offset some of that, and this I can say, is after we use some long range munitions, whether it's tomahawks or, you know, JASMs and all that kind of stuff, is inert munitions, which means you take the explosives out of a bomb, you keep the strapped on GPS kind of guidance system and just turn it into a very large lawn dart. We actually did that in both the first and second Gulf War, and that was to divest the Ba'athist regime from trying to leverage non-combatants as part of like their urban shield strategy or human shields. So those are definitely real issues, to be sure. There's a reason Secretary of War Pete Hegseth put us on a war footing to produce, like on a crash program, to produce critical interceptors and long range strike munitions. Now you're seeing that in the news in the open. Even with those constraints, and those are some things that we obviously have to take into account, which is another reason why we're putting another additional carrier battle group in the area that can service those targets, because now you can use, instead of using more critical long range strike munitions, now you can use a higher sustained tempo from your aircraft carriers and lesser, critical munitions to take out or service said targets. So concern, yes. Does that mean that the Mullah regime doesn't have to go? No, like they have to go. That piece has to be taken off the board. Not the least of which is that, again, I would contend a lot of analysts, it's a pretty broad consensus amongst analysts that are in the opening stages of a high intensity world war anyway. And so the chances of turning it off is very low. All of our enemies know that, so they're trying to bleed us out of as much of our capability as they can. You have to weigh relative risk. The Mullah regime is a pseudo-theologically motivated actor. They're absolutely bug nuts crazy, and they are going to pursue nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, and all the rest of their horrible shit no matter what, which means they got to go. And so we're getting ready to make sure they go. Right? I mean, like the stuff they're trying at the most recent discussion was like a discussion to discussion. It's all bullshit. Like maybe they potentially reduce their enrichment to 60% for like 3 years, or outsource it to a third party like Russia or China. Like all it just means is that it's not that their Mullah regime is trying to find ways to ensure its breakout capability and somehow sucker President Trump into believing that they're somehow are going to hold true to any deal that they make. I promise you, President Trump's not a sucker. And I guarantee you there are many within the administration that almost everybody sees that they're full of shit. So not saying, I guess, to come back to the point you made, those are real issues that the Mullah regime and or their patron states, Putin's criminalized Chinese Communist Party, are trying to leverage to bump the cost as high as they can. We're also modifying our stuff on the fly to counter their counter, which is why you have a second carrier battle group going into theater.
Okay. Who's next, BT?
Okay, next we have Samantha.
Samantha.
Why should anyone respect Syria's border integrity?
What? Say that again, louder.
Why should anyone respect Syria's border integrity?
Why should anyone respect Syria's border integrity? Why should anyone respect Syria's border integrity? Okay, right now we don't have Syria is like a can of expired dog food that if you basically open it, it's going to stink up the entire room, and like it's going to make everyone uncomfortable. So you just basically need to keep the lid on it so that it doesn't basically get everybody else dragged into a mess, right? So even though it's very chaotic and it doesn't seem like a real country, and so like a Frankenstein monster, and so many different pieces that don't belong to each other have been pushed next to each other and they called it a country, the thing is that the alternative is that if it falls apart, then it's going to affect everyone. So I'm not saying that we will succeed holding it together, but I do understand why the attempt is being made, because even though it's a mess right now, the mess that will result from it completely falling apart will be more chaotic than even the chaos that we're dealing with right now. Does that make sense? Oh, okay, so she's saying yes. She gave it a thumbs up. Okay.
Okay, next we have Sammy Bonanno.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I just want to say hi to everyone. I'm new in the group. I'm actually a second generation Iranian. We never lived in Iran. I have a quick question. There's this YouTube channel called JNS. I don't know if you were aware of it, with Emily Schrader. Okay.
Yeah, I've been a
Anyway,
guest there. Have you not
yeah,
seen my
okay.
show there as a
No,
guest?
I haven't
Yeah.
seen. But anyway, there's a segment. She has a bunch of people.
We
And they
love
talk
we
about
love
this.
I think I think most people here love Emily, but go
Yeah,
on.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
they talk about the scumbag of the week. Like with the guests. And she had this Iranian Jewish actress who played in Tehran, and it was her turn, and she was saying, "My scumbag who could maybe like redeem themselves is the Artesh, because they don't seem to be doing anything because they're supposed to be the people's army." So what's your view on that? Like who outnumbers who in Iran? Like there's the IRGC, the Basij, the Artesh. Like who's the largest group? Who has the most power?
So
You know?
so okay, so those are two different questions. I think if I remember correctly, the Artesh has more people than the IRGC, but the IRGC has more power because they get funding more. They're not just a military unit; they're an economic. So for people who might not have the context, in Iran, the Islamic Republic has two branches of the military. There's two units of the military. It's the IRGC and the Artesh. The IRGC was created after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. The Artesh predates the Islamic Revolution and it's historic, and it was our army in Iran during the Shah's time, during the Pahlavi dynasty. So if I correct me, somebody in the YouTube chat, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the number of people that are in the Artesh are more than the people in the IRGC, but the IRGC is a lot more powerful. And every year, if you look at the government budget, they cut something from the Artesh. And the IRGC is a lot more ideological. It's a lot more for the Islamic Revolution rather than for Iran. The main duty is to protect Iran's border integrity. But the IRGC's mission statement is to make the whole world Islamic. So the IRGC has, beyond just being a military, they're also control 2/3 of Iran's economy, right? They're basically involved with 2/3 of Iran's economy right now, and they control also they're the main power within the politics as well. I would say some people say Khamenei is the greatest. The office of the supreme leadership is the greatest political power in Iran. I disagree with that. I think it's the IRGC. So when it comes to who's on what side, we have to cut these two into four pieces, right? So we have the body of the IRGC, we have the head of IRGC, we have the body of the Artesh, and we have the head of the Artesh. So in the past couple of decades or so, the past couple of years, the Islamic Republic has completely removed the generals of the Artesh that were basically there based on merit and knew what they were doing and might have been more loyal to the Iranian people. They have removed them. And now the leaders of the Artesh are basically just IRGC. So the leaders of IRGC and the leaders of Artesh are basically the same scumbags. And there's no hope for any of them. But when it comes to the body, the IRGC, within the body of the IRGC, you could expect to find a lot more Islamically radical minded people within the IRGC on average compared to the Artesh. But if some people have some hope for the Artesh, it's not because of the current leaders, but maybe because many people think that within the body of Artesh, there's so many people that are there that are still loyal to the Iranian people instead of the Islamic Republic. So they're hoping that at some point during the revolution against the Islamic Republic, when the Islamic Republic falls or it's getting close to falling, the Artesh comes and starts defending the people and defend them against the Islamic Republic, which will basically be the end of the revolution and will mean that the revolution has been victorious. That's when usually you consider a revolution to be victorious, is when a major part of the armed forces basically stops fighting the people and either claims to be neutral or starts defending the people against the oppressive regime. I think what you're referring to, if I understood you correctly, is that a lot of people were disappointed with the Artesh because during the massacre that the Islamic Republic did in early January, we didn't see anybody from the Artesh coming in and maybe protecting the Iranian people. Is that what you're
Correct.
referring to, Sami?
Since Sogan, that's the name of the actress that was talking, she said they're supposed to be the people's army. So she was kind of disappointed as to why they haven't really done anything to defend and protect the people, since they're
So
like weaponized. You know?
what I've heard, and this needs to be confirmed, is that the Islamic Republic, when the revolution was starting, they disarmed the Artesh. Okay.
Okay.
And we did see videos of people meeting, people, the armed forces, some armed forces, where they were waving at people, joining like next side by side next to the people, and they didn't have any guns or they weren't armed, right? So the Artesh is very mistrusted by the Islamic Republic, so their access to weapon is usually very much controlled. So if this is true that the Artesh is disarmed, and that would do two things. First of all, it will, if this is an if, okay, this will then give us a reason for why they couldn't come and protect the Iranian people. Two, it might also it also would confirm that they are on the side of the Iranian people, or else the Islamic Republic wouldn't be afraid of them. Why would they have to take such measures if the Islamic Republic wasn't afraid of them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so that is the completion of our original list. Though, if there was time, Ali S. and Drew D. had a second question. And then, Armin, don't forget that you had something else for us as well.
Okay. So who's talking now?
So we can move on to Ali S.
Ali S. Okay.
Hi. How much time
Ali?
would you say? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, how much time would you say you have left to answer this question?
I have time. Tell me, what's the
Okay.
question?
I was just wondering. So I'm in the same boat as Emmerich. I want to go there. I want to go to Iran and help. So I was just wondering, it would be a kind of fun question for you. If you were 25 years old and you know everything that you know now, and this opportunity is happening in 2026, what would you do?
Am I married?
Oh yeah, clarification. You are not married. You do not have a mortgage or kids. You have nothing that ties you down.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about it, because whenever I'm making life decisions, the first thing that comes to my mind is my family, right? So I've never even exercised not thinking about them. So this would be like
I mean,
hard
I can
to.
ask this the
I,
next discussion. So if you want to think about it.
what I would do is I would go to Iran. I would move to Iran, and I would start a studio there, right? Yeah, I have the answer. Okay, so I will go to Iran. I will have my YouTube. I will keep doing the YouTube. Do this. What I like to do is basically talk about ideas and talk to other people who are interested in, philosophy and politics and religion and history, and try to come up with the best ideas on how to make a society prosper. I think the best way to do that is through live shows and YouTube and stuff like that. So I would just want to continue doing that. But if then I would move to Iran, and I would basically I would bring mullahs, right? I would bring previous regime followers. I would bring communists. I would bring people, cessationists. I will have debate shows. I will basically bring them and debate them live on air, face to face. And I will just turn it into a discussion show. And I will basically travel from city to city, go to Qom, go find the mullahs there, try to do like, uh, documentaries with them over their religious upbringing and what turned them into a mullah, and if they changed their mind after the fall of the Islamic Republic. I would get very much involved in political discussions. I will basically try to do a lot of discussions, live discussions in my studio inside Iran regarding the political history of the modern world, of the French Revolution, the American Revolution, everything that happened after the Cold War, all the greatest political thinkers of after the French Revolution, and how their views affected society and what we could learn from it to rebuild Iran from everything else that other people went through. I would do a lot of economic discussions regarding the greatest economic theories and the great thinkers and everything that has been tried all around the world, and do an empirical analysis of what works and what doesn't work, and discuss that with people who disagree with me. I would like to debate people who have more of a mindset that the government needs to be involved in, because I'm a limited government kind of guy when it comes to economy. I would like to debate people who disagree with me on this topic. I would go to Iran and basically challenge people who disagree with me on their ideas and try to advocate for the ideas that would make Iran prosper.
All right, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Was that a satisfying answer, or do you think that was like not a good
No, it is. I
that
just
was a
wanted
waste
to know
of
what you would do. So yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
yeah. I like to I basically just like to explore ideas and figure out what works. And I like to do it with other people. I like to do basically what I'm doing here right now with you guys, but maybe inside Iran. Yeah, but continue. Yeah, let's go.
Okay, wonderful. So next we have Drew D.
Hello. For my second question, it was just more of a military question. So, Iran is in a really geographically important area. I think a lot of Americans don't really understand that, by the way. And so, by the US getting bases in Iran, which Prince Reza Pahlavi has talked about in the past, it puts a lot of pressure on China from the west, and also southern Russia, a lot of pressure on Afghanistan, Pakistan, but with that is obviously going to be confrontational to those countries. So, how would you like the timeline to work with the US coming in with potential military bases so Iran doesn't look like a puppet of the US, but also doesn't wait too long where, the East can come in and start influencing Iran and undermine the revolution?
But so I don't think it's a matter of time. So let me clarify. Let me understand what your question is. You're saying when it comes to United States attacking the Islamic Republic, which seems to be happening, you're suggesting that the timing of that will change the impression on whether or not the new government in Iran is a puppet of United States or not,
Uh,
and you think if they come too early, it would be more likely that they would be seen as a puppet. Is that what you're saying?
I'm talking after the regime is toppled, putting U.S. bases in
Oh.
Iran, and that'll help
Oh.
strengthen the regime. But if we do it right away, then you start to look like a puppet of the U.S. But if you wait too long, then you let influence from other countries come in. So, what do you think about that kind of timeline and how that should go?
So you're thinking that this is going to happen, like it's inevitable, like that the United States will be opening some bases inside Iran for stability? Because I don't see that happening other than for the sites that where their enrichment of uranium is happening, and just so that they make sure that they, other than that, I mean, is Gary here? So why do you think that this is inevitable, that the United States is going to have military bases inside Iran?
I thought I did hear that Reza
Jeff-
Pahlavi had talked about that in the past, that he would
No,
denuclearize
no.
and that he
Oh,
would open up for U.S. bases to be in Iran. Yeah, I was looking at it.
I think we're talking about international observers. That doesn't require military bases. I think Americans will not like that themselves. Like to, I mean, I don't know. Maybe if it's based on both countries agreeing, and they have some agreements with each other, and has nothing to do with like invasion, just like they have bases, I don't know, in South Korea and Germany, like something like that. That could be helpful to bring stability to Iran before we have our own army strengthened. I don't think the timing of it is going to change that much. I think it's going to be based on need. I think if it is demonstrated, if we could see that building our army is taking longer than we were hoping for, and we have some major challenges that we're not able to deal with right now because we're just trying to stabilize everything right now and it's chaotic. Maybe if we observe that, then there's going to be more both international and internal tolerance for it. But if they don't see that from a political, but I'm just saying, like internally within Iran, would people welcome that? And I think that if you just say from the beginning, without giving the new Artesh a shot, if you were like, oh yeah, guys, by the way, we can't do this, so let's just bring the Americans, I think that is going to be seen as negative. It's like, don't you want to give us like a shot? Like, are we this pathetic? I think if you give us if we give us a shot and we see like, okay, yep, we need help, then there's going to be internal acceptance of like, we need help. But if you just start with the assumption that we can't do this, so let's just bring the Americans, I think internally many people might hate that. And I would be more concerned about Iranian people's view on things rather than the rest of the world. Once we remove the Islamic Republic, we don't really need that much of a permission from other people regarding how we do our internal politics. But I would be more focused on making sure that the Iranian people are satisfied and they think that we are in, like, they feel like this is a good independent nation state with a state that is actually doing what the Iranian people want. So the priority is to satisfy the Iranian people. And if we get that, either the rest of the world should follow, because if they see the Iranian people want this, what the state is doing is what the Iranian people want, then either they should respect that, and if they don't, well, then we shouldn't care much about their opinion anyways, right? I think, if I'm guessing this right now, I think that if we first give it a shot before we do this, when Iranian people observe the need for it, then they will be tolerant, they will be accepting of it. Jeffrey, what do you think?
Without a doubt, if I know that His Highness Prince Reza Pahlavi has outlined he wants cooperation with the United States, and he did ask for. I want to be careful here. So he wanted like democratic transition and security assurances, meaning he's asking, at least from what I've seen, I might be wrong in this, a roundabout way to ensure that regional meddlers don't undermine the stability and transition as Iranians liberated, Iranians who have been liberated from the Mullah regime's oppression, ultimately decide what kind of government they want. Now, that being said, as far as like having air bases there and the utility of that, well, of course. I mean, like if in a post Mullah regime republic that's aligned with the United States and they allow U.S. air bases, it would dramatically enhance the United States power projection across the Middle East, Central Asia, and near Russia's southern flank. And it would also counterbalance the Chinese Communist Party's growing regional footprint. As you pointed out, such a move might carry some risk of escalation, as Moscow and Beijing would likely view it as strategic encirclement. Then again, the tooth and like the gloves are off and the teeth and claws are out anyway. So, they would probably try to undermine stability. So, if the United States were to support a democratic transition and provide security assurances in a post-Islamic Republic Iran, the utility would be more political and stabilizing than pure military, as Armin had said. U.S. support could help prevent a power vacuum. It could reduce risk of civil war and discourage interference by Putin or Xi during the fragile transition period. That's why we kind of talked about, the United States, I mentioned this at the beginning of this particular YouTube, this particular talk today, about the fact that the United States has over 20 years experience in counterinsurgency via the global war on terror. And it would behoove probably both Iranians and the United States, everybody, to leverage that experience to help set up, say, Iran's version, like post-Mullah Iran's version of the Department of Homeland Security. This isn't, then again, the any number of meddlers like, oh, see, they're setting up a puppet state. No, we're not setting up a puppet state. We're just trying to make sure that a post-Mullah Iran isn't vulnerable to like Islamic fundamentalist terrorists trying to repeat the horrible shit the Red Black Alliance did, right, and directly contributing to the fall of the Shah and robbing the Iranian people of the Shah's bold, push towards developing Iran into a nation of tolerant modernity. So yeah, I mean, it's a valid point. I'm not saying there isn't geopolitical and geostrategic event there. If we were to have air bases there, he's probably thinking something akin to a particular air base that was in Afghanistan that allowed us to maintain eyes on a certain particular base in China, where China does a lot of its ballistic missile, nuclear weapons production and testing. Something along those lines. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, I've not seen anything from His Highness Reza Pahlavi stating that he wants like U.S. air bases in Iran. I have heard that he would, he definitely wants to have assistance with ensuring the stability during the transition, which is only reasonable. I mean, this isn't to say that we're involved to select or to affect what government Iranians openly select. Rather, we're trying to make sure that you don't have other hostile actors like Putin or Xi try to disrupt the transition because they're pissed they lost one of their proxies. We want to ensure the autonomy of Iranian people's selection of whatever government they ultimately choose to have.
I was also thinking like long term too, how we have bases in Germany and Poland and like where those are friendly countries. It's, there's
And
no
Iraq,
question.
Iraq right now. Iraq right now.
Yeah, the only thing is that's like a different thing because we did go in and invade Iraq, where
We didn't invade Iraq. That's not true. We liberated Iraq. Invasion is a very specific term with a very specific geopolitical definition, which is forced territorial cessation. We did not conquer Iraq, and we don't have colonies in Iraq.
okay,
That's
well, we came in with a military force into Iraq, which
But
that
again, I
was
don't want to. I
fighting.
don't want to get into that discussion, but I do now that I think about it, because Princess of Power, like I do think that we probably are going to have at some point military bases for like not just for the transition, not for the transition period, but after the transition period.
Right.
Like if you are Iran will become a U.S. ally, and United States usually has military bases in countries that are allies with, right? And I think that bases will be seen as a military cooperation. It wouldn't be sold as like, oh, they're here to control us. I mean, Iranians love America. Okay, Iranians love America. It's their number one favorite country, and I think right now Israel is like at number two, okay, after
you're saying
America,
it'd
right?
be Iranian
But they
bases
love
run by Iranians that we could use, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the Iranian people are going to see it as military cooperation with our major ally, America. That's how they're going to see it, and everybody's going to be like, look, Germany, South Korea, they have military bases, so they're not being South Korea is not being controlled by America, but they have military bases in South Korea. So I think those examples are going to be used as a way to suggest that this is like. And again, after the transitional period, Princess of Pahlavi is not in full control anymore, right? So after the transition period is not Princess of Pahlavi, if he becomes king, he's going to be in charge of the things that we decide the king is responsible for, right? And for example, he's not going to be in charge of our foreign policy. He's not going to be in charge of like passing what laws that gets passed in Iran, right? So is a, I mean, he's still going to be influential, but his influence is going to be much more limited. Okay, yeah,
I
but
have
sorry,
3 minutes and we are closing out with a hard stop. Could you go ahead and close us out with what you wanted to say earlier, please?
yes, I just quickly wanted to talk about Saudi Arabia because and how what is their interest right now when it comes to the fall of the Islamic Republic, whether it's for or against, and how they are going to be impacted by the fall of the Islamic Republic and the return of Pahlavi to Iran and Iran becoming a secular democracy. Whether this is going to benefit Saudi Arabia or it's going to hurt them, whether they welcome this or they're very much afraid of it. A lot of people talk about how bad this is going to be for Saudi Arabia, but there are also benefits, and I think within Saudi Arabia we have both positions. One thing that we already discussed here is that for the Saudi perspective, the worst outcome when it comes to United States and Israel attacking the Islamic Republic is for them to attack the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Republic doesn't get toppled. That is the worst outcome. So they, in their mind, either don't start this war, or if you're going to start it, end the Islamic Republic. They hate the idea of a middle option. They cannot, like, that's their number one fear, right? They think that okay, the Americans are just going to come, they're going to attack the Islamic Republic, they're going to start a regional war, and then they're going to leave, and then we're stuck here with the mess after, all right? When it comes to the Islamic Republic, like, but some people suggest that no, they're also against a strong Iran as a whole. And we have, by the way, I'm going to go discuss the Islamic aspect of like how this is going to influence Saudi Arabia Islamically. But let me just go through some of the geopolitical and economical aspects of this. So the negatives are pretty obvious. If the Islamic Republic falls and Iran becomes a strong secular democratic country, the number one negative would be the oil and gas will be in the free markets on and not just exclusively sold at discount prices to China and India. It's just going to be available in a way that it has never been available, competing with the oil and gas of Saudi Arabia. Number two negative way that it's going to hurt Saudi Arabia is that the Abraham Accord is going to be much, much less significant, and Saudi Arabia would not be able to use that as leverage to get something from America or Israel, because first of all, the whole Palestinian cause will become less important to deal with because they lost their main funder, but also because now Iran will become a much more attractive ally to Israel than Saudi Arabia. So that's going to reduce the importance of Saudi Arabia. Another way that is going to affect Saudi Arabia is the flow of investment and tourism. A lot of it that is now considering Saudi Arabia will now look at Iran, especially tourism. But now Iran is going to be able to do all of that, but it also has a lot of nature and a lot of historical sites, and an ancient culture that Saudi Arabia doesn't have. So a lot of people who were planning to go to Saudi Arabia for tourism, given that Iran is right there, They were like, why go to Saudi Arabia when I could go to Iran? So many people would choose Saudi Arabia, so they would lose a lot of tourist money. I do want to argue why the Saudi Arabia could benefit, given that all of these negatives. Let me tell you why I still think that the net benefit will be positive for Saudi Arabia. But before I go to the Islamic discussion, I do think the positive for Saudi Arabia is going to be stability in the region, which is more important for Saudi Arabia than oil and gas, right? Even though Iran will basically be taking money away from Saudi Arabia when it comes to investments and tourism, I think that the overall money that is going to come to the region as a whole is going to be more than the money that the Saudi Arabia is going to be losing because it's going to go to Iran. Because with the fall of the Islamic Republic, we're going to get a level of stability around in the region as a whole that it's not just Iran that is going to go look more attractive for investments and business. Everybody around Iran is going to also look more because guys, remember that Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Dubai and UAE managed to attract so much capital because they were somewhat more stable than Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. So war could come to these regions. So there's the valuation of all of the economic activities in these regions is still discounted because there is still some risk associated with, I don't know, maybe like the Islamic Republic deciding that they want to bomb Doha or Dubai or Riyadh at some point. We saw just recently a missile dropped inside Doha by Israel, and all of that started because of the Islamic Republic, right? So these are not completely chaos, conflict-free regions. But with the fall of the Islamic Republic, the level of war and conflict and terrorist activity will drop so low that what we saw in the amount of business activity that we saw in UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar will now increase significantly more, even now with Iran as a competitor, So the whole region, and not only that, Iran, even if Iran grows, competes with Saudi Arabia and grows economically, Iran itself would be a source of investment towards Saudi Arabia because of the increased economic activity. So I think the whole region will benefit. And Saudi Arabia desperately needs diversification from oil and gas, anyways, right? So it's true that the oil and gas of Iran will compete with the oil and gas of Saudi Arabia, but oil and gas prices are going to drop sooner than most people realize because of alternative sources of energy. The technology behind that is rapidly improving, and this is why Saudi Arabia is desperate to diversify its economy. So stability in the region caused by the fall of the Islamic Republic will help with that more than it hurts, right? So that's that. But let's go now to some Islamic discussions regarding how that affects Saudi Arabia when it comes to culture, like Islamic influence of the Islamic Republic on Saudi Arabia, right? So Saudi Arabia will no longer have to fear the expansion of the Shia crescent, right? And the pan-Islamist pan-Shia Islamist imperial agenda of the Islamic Republic. Remember that the most oil-rich parts of Saudi Arabia is Shia, and Khomeini from the very beginning of the Islamic Republic, of the Islamic Revolution of 1979, had its eye on Saudi Arabia, and they wanted to invade Saudi Arabia using the uprising of Shias in Saudi Arabia. So remember, from the perspective of Khomeini, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 had nothing to do with Iran. It just started in Iran, but it wasn't an Iranian revolution. It was an Islamic revolution, and he hated Iran as a concept, and he wanted to continue the revolution until he captures the entire planet. Okay, and Saudi Arabia was the main on his. Saudi Arabia was the next on his targets list, right? And the Saudis have never had a good night's sleep ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. They were always fearing the expansion of the expansionist mindset of the Islamic Republic. So what will come in its place, it would be the Iranian secular wave. That is something that you might think that they would fear, but on a much less existential level. Like when it comes to the Shia crescent fear, that's a fear that, like, yeah, we want to end you. We want to come invade you. We want to come remove the green flag of Saudi Arabia. And as they chant, like they have chants about this to write Haydar Karrar on the green flag. So it's like the Islamic Republic advertises that we will remove the writing on the Saudi flag and we will come and take the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina and bring it to our territory, and we will change your flag for it to say Haydar Karrar instead of what was written on the flag of Saudi Arabia right now, which is actually very telling because what's on the flag of Saudi Arabia is the Shahadatain, is the name of Allah and Muhammad. And by admitting that they want to remove that writing and put Haydar on it, which is actually the name for Ali, shows how Sunnis are correct to consider Shias not really Muslims, because like what, like you're bragging about removing the name of Allah and Muhammad and putting Ali's name on the flag. Like what the hell? Like could you be any less any less Islamic? Which is I mean they have a point, right? So we're going to have like an Iranian secular and economic wave, which is Western aligned, which is also going to make Saudi Arabia's alliance with the West still important, but less important than before because now we have Iran as a ally of the West as well. Another effect that this is going to have is this is going to probably inspire the Saudi youth to demand even faster modernization than what they're getting right now, because the modernization that is coming in Saudi Arabia, a lot of it is about concerts, dancing, drinking alcohol, I don't know, Halloween, all of that stuff, women being able to drive. But then when you get a wave of Iranian people that are completely un-Islamic and would want, they're secular to the point that they want to be able to even say whatever they want about Islam. They want to be rebellious. They want freedom of speech. They want secularism, not just in the not just in a symbolic way that, oh, we get to dance and go to concerts and drink alcohol and party. They want secularism in a more meaningful, fundamental way, that we want political freedoms. We want to be able to criticize Islam. We want to be able to say what we want to say. We want to be able to even have more freedoms. Like, I mean, they will have freedoms. They will have freedoms to, they will be free from religious rule more than even Saudi Arabia, which is going to be shown all over the Middle East as, look at the young population of Iranians doing things that are not allowed in other places. Saudi Arabia has already gotten itself into the idea that we're modernizing, and has already gotten the youth basically into the mindset that you could expect modernization and some social freedoms from me once the expectation has already been created. And now if videos and images comes from Iran which shows a higher degree of freedom that you don't have in Saudi Arabia, given that you have created already that expectations in Saudi Arabia, you're going to be able to see a faster demand, like a demand for faster secularization and modernization from the Saudi youth, in my opinion, which is going to be really hard for the Saudi to, even though they have been modernizing and giving people more freedom, that level of freedom will be hard for the Saudi government to give into, given that that is going to anger the Wahhabis and the Muslim Brotherhood type of people within Saudi Arabia, to the point where the Saudis might fear that this is going to spark an Islamic revolution if we basically speed this up too much, right? So we have competition of soft power. Riyadh will try to position itself as a country that has the proper balance of still having a stable traditional Islamic culture while modernizing at the same time. I expect them to kind of try to suggest that what's happening in Iran is too radical. We are basically the country that is doing this a little bit more conservatively. We're keeping the Islamic identity while at the same time modernizing. whereas the Iranian youth is just going all out crazy, and they're turning into completely godless heathens that are a little bit too radical when it comes to. So they're going to try to position themselves as finding the right balance of keeping Islamic culture while also modernizing at the same time, and trying to suggest that we're doing this the right way, right? So let me see what I have here. So we're gonna have, so currently the Persian Gulf, it says Gulf states. It shouldn't say that, guys. By the way, in English, wherever you read something, when I say the Gulf states, please correct them. Say the Persian Gulf states. We have Gulfs all around the world. Like we have different bodies of water that are called Gulf. The Persian Gulf is not Gulf; it's the Persian Gulf. Okay. So it says the Gulf states, as you said, the Persian Gulf states spend billions on defense against the Islamic Republic. The Cold War of the Middle East will end. So basically the Cold War between the Arab Sunni countries around the Persian Gulf with the Islamic Republic will end. However, what we're going to see is the beginning of a new rivalry, which is going to be the economic competition, right? A free Iran would compete with Saudi Arabia for foreign investment, tourism, and energy markets. I already mentioned that. Saudi Arabia often promotes a concert, even though it's modernizing, it still wants to give the image that we're still a conservative nation, that you need to respect our conservative values. And that's going to, when it comes to tourists, when tourists go to Saudi Arabia, there's a much higher degree of freedom, but you still have the understanding that this is a conservative nation and you need to be respectful of their conservative ideology. But when it comes to Iran, the tourists will be the tourists will be encouraged to go all out. There's nothing Islamic here anymore. And in fact, we're going to we're going to try to show the foreigners that we are even more free than they are. We're going to be trying to, Iranians are very competitive. So you could expect the wildest of all parties inside Iran once Iran is free, signaling to the rest of the world will also bring a lot of money in it. Because right now, for example, you see big stadiums, big concerts in Saudi Arabia, and imagine all of that money that was invested to build all of these was with the understanding that there's going to be limitations. There's going to be limitations on alcohol. There's going to be limitations of people hooking up and having sex and having all the fun in the world and going crazy in parties and clubs and everything. There's always going to still be some limitations in Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia. But even though in the past 47 years, these countries went from being they managed to attract so much capital in the past 40 years to build these futuristic looking cities with the because they had the oil and gas and they were desperate to attract investments. But imagine all of a sudden Iran becomes free. It has the oil and gas, it has the cultural background, it has a much bigger landmass that it could attract so many different projects, but it also doesn't have those cultural limitations that countries like Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia have. So everything that you saw happen in the past 40 years in these three countries now is going to be happening in Iran on an exponential rate. Would have wished that the money that they spent in these countries, Iran would have been freed sooner, so they could have done it in Iran. But now they have to make up for it, right? So this is going to be a major challenge. So there's benefits and also challenges for Saudi Arabia. As you can see, the stability will be welcomed, but the competition will be something that they have to be dealing with. But if I was one of the Saudis, I would pretty much prefer competing economically with a free Iran than competing in a Cold War militarily with the Islamic Republic. That would be my choice. I think that as much as big of a challenge the second one is a much better alternative to all of the headache that the Islamic Republic gives Saudi Arabia. So yeah, but I think this is going to speed up secularization all around the region, around the Persian Gulf, and also even beyond that.